Hello, this is Tanner Dykin, pastor of Open Door Baptist Church in Mayfield, Kentucky. And this video is on the coherence-based genealogical method. Recently, there has been a lot of discussion on the internet, especially by New Testament text-critical apologists, modern text-critical apologists anyway, that the CBGM, talking a lot about it. There's going to be a lot going on with it, and I've seen that there's not really been a whole lot of information on what the CBGM actually is. And since I read the introductory book, I thought I might as well go ahead and make a video to kind of explain what it is for people who don't really know what it is. The CBGM essentially is the new version of Westcott and Hort's idea of genealogies. Up until now, it's been thought that because of contamination, which we'll look at now, that because of the problem of contamination between manuscripts, that is, that sometimes, in fact most of the time, a manuscript is not simply a copy of a manuscript that came before it. Usually there's a little mixture. Usually there is a main manuscript that was used to copy off of, but sometimes a scribe will use another manuscript for a certain portion. Maybe his manuscript has a page missing out of it, and he has to go to another manuscript, and he has to get the text out of that and put it into his text. And this makes putting the manuscripts which we have into a genealogical relationship, that is a relationship of parent manuscript to child manuscript, it makes it extremely difficult to do, and in fact it's near impossible to do by hand. And as you see here, it's because of the sheer bulk of information that needs to be evaluated. And so computers have been implemented to try and alleviate that strain. That you don't have to do all of this by hand now. You can kind of go through and the computer can help you to choose where and to find where the contamination is in the manuscript, and so that you can put it into a proper genealogical relationship with its close relatives. And so with that, I'd like to just go through and kind of explain the different concepts of what this system is. And so we'll just go ahead with that. The first concept we need to understand is what's called pre-genealogical coherence. And it's, of course, these are big technical terms, but basically what it is you count, as you see here, it's the frequency of agreement on variance between two witnesses. So basically, you have two manuscripts in front of you, and you want to count the places of normal variation or variance that we know about, that exist. We want to count all of those up, and we want to count how often these two manuscripts agree with each other at the places of variation. So here I have just an example that I took from John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress. I know that this isn't a place for text critical work, but it just helps us English speakers to kind of understand what's going on. So what we have here is we have two texts, and the red words that I have here, they're the places where I'm just going to say are places of normal variation, where some manuscripts say this, some manuscripts say that. And so we have 5 places here, and among those 5 places, only one place at one place do these two manuscripts disagree, and that's at number 3. You see that fell suddenly into an alligator or fell suddenly into an allegory, and that's the only place where they differ. Well, basically we just want to count them up, and we want to see what percentage of agreement there is on those places. And that's what pre-genealogical coherence is. For this, it's 80%, because we have 5 places of normal variation, and we have one place of disagreement, only one place. And so we have 80% agreement basically on those places of normal variation. That's what pre-genealogical coherence is. It's not a terribly difficult concept. Hopefully I've been able to explain it well, but we'll move on anyway, and if anyone has any questions, you can just leave a comment and I'll hopefully get back to you. The next idea is the idea of local stemma. Now this is where we start to get into the real meat, I guess. And the local stemma is where at each place of variation, we compile and we collect all of the different variants for each reading. We see for number 1 there's the variant at, or there's the variant an. We see for number 3 it goes from allegory to alligator to alligator pit, and so you have 3 variations here. Basically what local stemma, the local stemma at each variant, and that's why it's local, it's at a particular place of variation, you have the direction of change as it has been judged by the text critics. Basically you have, for alligator, they've judged that the original reading was allegory, and then it went to alligator, and then it went to alligator pit. We can see that the scribe might have made an error because he was sleepy and he was dreaming about an alligator or something, and he wrote alligator instead of allegory. And the next step in that is a scribe saw that and he just added in the word pit, maybe. So he said alligator pit just to kind of make it a little more funny. But that direction we see from allegory to alligator pit is a decision that's made by the text critics. It's them sitting down with the NA28 or whatever and just saying, okay, well, of these variants, this is the direction, right? This is the direction of change. It changed from allegory to alligator pit over time. And so that's what the local stemma is, and they'll do that for each variant in the New Testament, basically choosing which is the original and then which is the derivative. Now, the problem with this is, of course, we can be wrong about these choices, of course, and the next step kind of tries to even that out and help to alleviate that problem, though we'll see later why I disagree with the idea that it does. But the next idea is genealogical coherence. And like pre-genealogical coherence, remember, we're counting the places of agreement and disagreement for pre-genealogical coherence. For genealogical coherence, we're adding this local stemma, you see. We have this local stemma. Now we're adding, for those places of disagreement, we're looking at the places of disagreement now. We're seeing how often the change is in one direction or in the other direction. And we're just counting those up and seeing what percentage of changes go from one to the other. So in this case, from A to B or from B to A for any given text witness, or really we should just say, go ahead and say manuscript tradition. But so we have, for number 1, it goes from at to an, it goes from B to A. For 2, they agree, so we just count that as pre-genealogical coherence. For number 3, again, B to A, 4, A to B, and then 5, B to A again. And so we have all of these numbers, and we basically just say, well, what percentage goes from B to A? We see it's 60% here, because there's 3 that go from B to A. There's 20% from A to B, because there's only 1 where the change goes from A to B. And for 20% is agreement. It's number 2 is just an agreement. And so the genealogical coherence for this one is 20% agreement, 60% B to A, and then 20% A to B. And that tells us that the most of the change that's going on is going from B to A, right? And now this is where it kind of maybe helps, or in theory it might help with evening out those text choices by the critics, or at least that's what they'll say. Say they have a mistake, that that number 5 is actually a change from A to B, right? Well, even though that was a mistake on the text critics' part, even though they judged that wrong, the difference is still well, we'll just say it's 40% each, right? But the more variance we have, supposedly the better, the higher the rate of, or the better it's going to be able to equal out and kind of help to catch the errors of the text critics, basically. So they may have even been wrong, say, on number 4. Maybe the original reading was least instead of last. And so, because it's 60% going from B to A, B is still considered the earlier witness, the earlier text witness. And so more weight will be given to B, basically. But anyway, let's go on to the next concept. So we have genealogical coherence. The next concept is the concept of what's called substemma. And in order to understand it a little better, let's look at these parsimonious assumptions. This is called the principle of parsimony. It's not principles, it's principle of parsimony, and these parsimonious assumptions are sort of an outpouring of that. It's kind of a text critical equivalent of Occam's razor, that the simplest explanation should be preferred. But these assumptions about the history of the text, number 1, we see that scribes mostly made good copies. That's an assumption. Number 2, most variants found in a manuscript are derived from an ancestor rather than from immediate scribal error. Number 3, scribes used fewer source manuscripts. And 4, ancestors will have a high pre-genealogical coherence with their descendants. These are just assumptions, of course. These are not so much provable in themselves. They're just, again, some assumptions that are made in order to continue with the system. And so with that, the idea of substemma is basically when we're looking at a text witness, if we're looking at a manuscript, right? We'll ask basically, what is the fewest potential ancestors that we need in order to explain this witness, the readings that it has? So, as we saw before, scribes mostly made good copies, they'll say, and scribes used fewer sources in number 3. And number 2, most variants found in a manuscript are derived from ancestors rather than from immediate scribal error. Basically, what this basically says is that if there is a error in a manuscript, it's much more likely to come from an ancestor manuscript. And if we can explain the existence of a text using fewer ancestors, then we should prefer that explanation. This is not really a true history of the text. It's just sort of an explanation as to how the text arose. So we see on the right here that in order to generate, or in order to explain how the manuscript on the left was made, we could use, say, 3 manuscripts, right? One has the reading "an" and the reading "take," and it was copied faithfully. One has the it has which and last, and then finally alligator in the third manuscript. But say we could explain this better with two manuscripts than with these three. Say there are two other manuscripts, or one manuscript which has alligator and which and last in it, then, and it's close, its pre-genealogical coherence is close to our manuscript that we're trying to determine the substemma for. This is the immediate genealogy, we could say. Then we should go for the simpler explanation, right? That's the idea. And this is aided by a computer. A computer will basically generate a whole bunch of possibilities, and then a text critic will sit down in front of those possible immediate families for a manuscript, and he'll go through them, and he may tweak them a little bit, and he may change them around, and he'll basically try to explain every reading that is found in a manuscript on the basis of manuscripts that came before it, right? On the basis of fewer manuscripts that came before it, and he'll basically weed out all of the ones with, say, 50 or more, or even more than 10 ancestors for a single manuscript. And when he's done, he'll have 2 or 3 manuscripts that adequately explain the existence of this manuscript he's looking at, and that'll be the substemma, the immediate family of 2 or 3 manuscripts that basically were the parent manuscripts, or not really the parent manuscripts, but the parent text, I should say, because we're talking about text witnesses here. We're not talking about the manuscript itself. These could be several generations before, or even just be copied out of the direct ancestor of the text we're trying to explain. But these texts, anyway, will hopefully explain the text that we're looking at. So that's the idea of substemma. It is the local, it's the close family of manuscripts, the immediate family of texts for the text that we're looking at. And you can see that this is all sort of derived from the concepts that came before it, from pre-genealogical coherence to get us really close to which texts are family with this one in some way. Then the substemma will kind of show the direction, of course, of the variants. Then the genealogical coherence will give us basically the direction on the manuscripts, the possible directions that they could go in between themselves. And finally, substemma is the immediate family based off of the genealogical coherence. And so that's that. And finally, we come to the final concept, and that is the global stemma. And I should probably explain what the word stemma actually means. A stemma is from the Greek, and it means, I believe, like a tree or a wreath, and basically it means a family. We'll just say that. But something that helps me to sort of remember that is that a stemma is when I'm asking what a local stemma is, or a substemma, or a global stemma, I am asking which manuscript or which text stems from the other, right? Which one is the offspring of the other, and that kind of helps me. But the global stemma is the entire account of the genealogical history of a given text, basically. And here I have, as you saw at the first slide, that diagram from B.B. Warfield's book. And this is basically the old idea of the genealogy of manuscripts or texts, only we're applying it to, well, the text tradition. We're not actually applying it to the manuscripts themselves. How did the text of the New Testament develop over time? And this is the idea of global stemma. And all it is we're just taking the substemma here, and we're just basically putting them together. We're just attaching them together, so that back here we have these three that come out that generate this one, and then we ask, well, what generated them? What's the best explanation for them? And we go back, and then we incorporate the first one that we're looking at here, and we incorporate in the genealogy of some other text, and then we would end up with something like this. It's not exactly the same as this, of course, but because it's on computers, but basically we just have this branching genealogy of the relationship of texts, and it brings us to basically the genealogy. Where did the text arise from, the various texts of witnesses? And that's it. That is the coherence-based genealogical method, and this could theoretically be useful in certain ways. At every step along the way, it could be used to give information that would help us to kind of, or to help text critics decide on a reading for a particular variant, which one is the original, or as they're saying now, the initial text, which is the initial reading, as if the autographs are not what we're trying to get back to anymore, but they're trying to get to the initial reading anyway. And so with pre-genealogical coherence, that's good to help us out. We can make some judgments informed by that. Same with the local, or the not the local stemma, but the substemma and genealogical coherence. And again, with the global stemma, it can help to supposedly point us towards the variants that we kind of want to look at. But anyway, that's the coherence-based genealogical method. So let's look at some points, or at least one point that I think of usefulness actually to the method that we've discussed today, and that is the pre-genealogical coherence. I think has some real utility because it is objective, right? Because it is not influenced by the bias of a text critic. If it's applied properly, it can only be applied in one way, and that is based on the facts about the manuscripts. And it has already demonstrated the care that was taken by scribes in copying the Byzantine tradition, the Byzantine text tradition. And for people like me, who hold to the traditional text, who hold to the Textus Receptus, this is, of course, great news, because the Textus Receptus is largely Byzantine in form, and this can help us in our apologetics and our trying to win text critics over to, at the very least, some kind of a Byzantine position, if not all the way home to a Textus Receptus position. And so I think that it does have usefulness in the pre-genealogical coherence. Now some points of criticism. Everything after the local stemma, remember that is the decision of text critics as to what the original reading was, or the direction of change. Basically, it's the direction of the change, remember. Of course, is subjective. It just depends on the text critic. It's their opinion, right? Or it's dependent, even worse, on the principles, the general principles that are being used by the text critic to decide on the direction of these changes. And you see here that this can lead to what's called a flipping of the substemma. And of course, then after that, the global stemma can actually be completely flipped upside down, And even CBGM scholars will admit this, and Tommy Wasserman and Peter Gurry, in their introductory book down there, we see they admit it on page 115 that this is a possibility, this could happen. And especially when you take it in conjunction with all of the criticisms of the modern text critical approach, especially as I'll point you to Robert Weiland's videos that he did on modern text criticism. That is a real danger, that what they're doing is they're just flipping on its head the history of the text of the New Testament and its development. This is a danger, and I think that is a real point of criticism. And they don't even really know that there's not really an easy way to prove that their assumptions are true, their principles are true, and so that's one point. A second point of criticism, and this will be the last one, is that the principle of parsimony may not accurately reflect the history of the text. These assumptions are reasonable. I think that it's not like they're saying something completely off the wall by saying that, well, most scribes used fewer manuscripts and most scribes tried to copy faithfully and this and that. But ultimately, these are assumptions, and while they are reasonable, they are not directly pointed at truth. They're not truth oriented so much as they are simplicity oriented. Basically, it's basically because even the name, the principle of parsimony, is basically just saying that, well, we want our model to look nice. We want it to be parsimonious. We want it to be easily usable and accessible by us. But that doesn't necessarily mean truth. That just means easily accessible. That means pretty to look at. And we have no way of verifying these assumptions. So we just don't know. Those are my criticisms of the CBGM at this point. I'm sure that more will come up later on, and I might do more videos on this in the future. But those are my basic criticisms of it. And so I'd like to thank you for watching this video. This video has been for the glory of Jesus Christ, and I call on all of you to investigate Jesus Christ, to look into Him, and to call on His name that you might be saved. This has also been in memory of our late brother Robert Paul Weiland, and I would like to recommend his videos to all of you who have not watched it yet. For further study on the CBGM, see Tommy Wasserman and Peter Gurry's book, A New Approach to Textual Criticism, an introduction to the coherence-based genealogical method. I'd again like to thank you all for watching, and God bless.